RomCalms, where romance and relaxation meet. Subscribe for a new romance novella every week. Harmony's Blade, presented by RomCalms.
Chapter 1. In the land where the rising sun had cast long shadows of warriors past, Kaito, a young samurai of the Minamoto Valley, had awakened before dawn in the stronghold of the Minamoto clan. As he rose, it wasn't command but the ingrained warrior's path that guided his steps. His ancestors' whispers had floated in the cool air, their spirits a constant companion. Kaito's morning ritual had begun with the unsheathing of his katana, the steel extension of his spirit. He practiced the ancient forms, each movement a silent conversation with the past, each strike an echo of the legacy he upheld. The sound of the blade cutting through the air was a familiar melody, a constant in the tumultuous symphony of his duties. Despite the comfort found in the weight of his sword, Kaito's thoughts often wandered to the world beyond the clan's walls, to the possibilities of peace that lay obscured by the shadows of incessant conflict. As he walked through the misty courtyards of his ancestral home, the cool air brushed his jet-black hair. Every stone in the path, every blooming cherry blossom spoke of the legacy he was bound to uphold. As the horizon began to burn with the first light of dawn, he paused to watch the sky transform, the colors shifting from muted indigo to brilliant gold. This daily spectacle of nature's artistry offered a brief respite, a moment of tranquility in the midst of the ever-looming storm of his responsibilities. He contemplated the day ahead, filled with strategies, alliances, and the inevitable clash of swords. His life was an unending sequence of battles, yet within his heart, a quiet rebellion stirred, a yearning for a world where the clamor of war was but a distant memory. Each day was regimented, from the moment the first light filtered through the shoji screens to the evening's quiet reflection. Kaito trained relentlessly, mastering the katana and the strategies of war that had been passed down through generations. Yet, amidst the physical exertion and the strict discipline, a sense of unrest stirred within him. With every swing of his sword, he wondered about the endless cycle of bloodshed, the relentless tides of war that claimed friends and foes alike. He was a warrior sculpted by duty and tradition, yet he harbored a yearning for a path less drenched in conflict. The war room of the Minamoto stronghold buzzed with a tense energy, a prelude to the looming battle. Strategists hovered over maps, their fingers tracing the contours of lands and rivers, while generals debated in hushed, urgent tones. Kaito stood among them, his presence both reverent and imposing. "Here," one general insisted, pointing to a narrow pass on the map. "This is where we'll have the advantage." His voice was gruff, seasoned by many battles. Kaito leaned in, his eyes scanning the terrain. "And what of the villages here?" he asked, his voice steady. "Civilians will be caught in the crossfire." A murmur rippled through the room. Another general, an older man with scars crisscrossing his face, met Kaito's gaze. "War is a beast, young Kaito. It does not discriminate between soldier and child." Kaito's jaw tightened. "Perhaps it is time it should," he retorted, the weight of his own experiences heavy in his heart. As the discussions continued, Kaito stepped out into the courtyard, where the air was filled with the clangor of blacksmiths and the shouts of training soldiers. He moved among them, presenting strength and resolve, yet his eyes were distant, reflective. A young boy, no more than 10, approached him, holding out a wooden sword with both hands. "Lord Kaito, will you show me how to fight?" he asked, his eyes wide with a mix of fear and admiration. Kaito looked down at the boy, seeing in him the reflection of his own once innocent eagerness. He knelt, bringing himself to the boy's level. To wield a sword is to carry the responsibility of life and death, he said, taking the wooden sword and gently pushing it back toward the boy. Learn to cherish life first, young one. The time for fighting will come soon enough. As night descended, Kaito found solace in the family shrine, the air thick with the scent of incense. He knelt before the armored suits of his ancestors, their silent gaze upon him. "Have I become too weary of war, ancestors?" he whispered, his voice a mix of reverence and desperation. "Or have I simply become too hopeful for peace?" The flickering candlelight cast shadows that danced like spirits across the walls. "You must lead with honor and courage," his father's voice echoed in his memory, a mantra from his childhood. Kaito rose, his resolve hardening with each step. "Honor and courage," he repeated to himself. But perhaps a new kind of honor, a new kind of courage. With that silent vow, he stepped out of the shrine, ready to face whatever the dawn might bring, carrying both the burden of his lineage and the flickering flame of hope for a different path. Chapter 2. In the verdant, secluded groves beyond the Takeda clan's bustling keep, Hana had found her sanctuary. The world around her hummed with the life of the forest, far from the echoing clang of steel and stern shouts from the training grounds. There, amidst the whispering trees and babbling brook, she tended to the wounded, not only soldiers with visible scars, but also the local children and elders, wearied by the constant strife. Her hands moved with practiced ease, wrapping bandages and brewing herbal remedies. "Be still," she instructed a young warrior, his body tense with the effort of remaining stoic despite the pain. "Your strength is not in denying your pain, but in overcoming it." The warrior nodded, his eyes reflecting a mixture of respect and surprise at the gentle firmness in her voice. As Hana moved from one patient to the next, her presence was a soothing balm, her every word and touch reinforcing her reputation as a healer, a giver of life, amidst the merchants of death. Despite her noble birth, she walked among the common folk with an unassuming grace, listening to their stories and sharing in their laughter and tears. Her ability to bridge the divide between the highborn and the lowly, the warriors and the peacemakers, made her a beloved figure. Yet, as the sun began to dip below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of fire and gold, a shadow of contemplation crossed Hana's face. She retreated to a quiet glade, a place where the petals of cherry blossoms carpeted the ground. There she allowed herself the solitude to reflect on the day's toils and the morrow's uncertainties. Why must our world be such a paradox? She wondered aloud, her voice a mere whisper carried away by the breeze. So much beauty in the land, yet so much bloodshed over it. As night enveloped the land, Hana retreated from her haven in the forest to the solitude of her private chambers within the Takeda keep. The walls, adorned with ancient tapestries and the delicate art of her ancestors, bore silent witness to her inner turmoil. She sat by the low, flickering light of a single lantern, a scroll unfurled before her, one filled with the poetry and philosophy of a more peaceful era, words that resonated with her longing for harmony. Her fingers traced the elegant calligraphy, each character a voice from the past, echoing her own desires for the world. She read aloud, her voice soft but clear. "When will we see swords turned to plowshares, and the thunder of war replaced with the laughter of children?" Suddenly a gentle knock interrupted her reverie. It was her younger brother, a boy not yet burdened with the full weight of their family's legacy. "Hana, why do you read such things?" he asked, his young brow furrowed in confusion. "Father says we must be strong and prepared to defend our honor." Hana smiled, a mixture of sadness and affection in her gaze. "We must be strong, yes, but strength comes in many forms," she replied, ushering him to sit beside her. Our honor is not only in how we fight, but in why we fight, and what we choose to protect. Her words seemed to settle gently upon the boy, his expression thoughtful. Hana took the opportunity to instill in him a sense of hope and a broader understanding of strength, one that wasn't solely reliant on martial prowess, but also on wisdom and compassion. As they talked, the candle between them flickered, casting a warm glow that illuminated their faces. Hana's brother eventually nodded off, his head resting against her shoulder, and she carefully laid him down, tucking him in with a tenderness that belied the harshness of their world. Alone once more, Hana returned to the window, gazing out at the moonlit landscape. The quiet of the night was a balm to her soul, yet the distant clang of the night watch reminded her of the inevitable dawn and the resumption of duties and realities. With a deep, steadying breath, she whispered a vow to herself and to the night, "I will seek the path of peace for as long as the stars guide my way." And with that, she extinguished the lantern, letting the moon's silver light guide her to rest. Chapter 3. On a night when the moon had hung low, casting a silvery glow over the landscape, Kaito had found himself beyond the confines of the Minamoto stronghold, seeking solace in the quiet of the forest. His steps had been silent, guided by an inner unrest that seemed to echo the whispering leaves. As he walked, the burdens of war had faded into the background, replaced by the simple, rhythmic sound of nature. Suddenly, he had sensed a presence, a subtle shift in the air. He halted, hand instinctively reaching for the hilt of his sword, his senses heightened. Then, through the trees, he saw her. Hana, the daughter of the rival Takeda clan. She stood by the edge of a serene lake, her figure bathed in the lunar light, unaware of his gaze. Kaito's initial impulse was to confront her, yet something about her tranquil demeanor gave him pause. He watched, hidden in the shadows, as she knelt by the water's edge, her hands gently skimming the surface. Curiosity overcame caution, and Kaito stepped forward, his foot snapping a twig beneath his weight. Hana turned abruptly, her eyes wide with surprise and a hint of fear. They stood there, mere feet apart, the silence between them charged with the unspoken history of their feuding families. "Who are you?" Hana's voice broke the stillness, her stance wary but composed. Kaito, realizing that any deception would be futile, replied, "I am Kaito, of the Minamoto clan." He watched her carefully, ready for any sign of aggression or flight. Instead of reaching for a weapon or running, Hana simply regarded him with a measured gaze, her initial alarm fading into a cautious curiosity. "And what does a Minamoto seek here, in the stillness of Takeda lands?" she asked, her voice betraying a hint of intrigue. Kaito hesitated, his usual confidence momentarily faltering under her steady stare. "Peace," he found himself saying, the word feeling both foreign and deeply true. A moment's respite from the relentless march of duty. Their conversation unfolded hesitantly, each word carefully weighed and measured. They spoke of the forest, the moon, the fleeting nature of peace, all the while skirting around the more dangerous topics of war and loyalty. Yet, beneath the careful exchange, a mutual understanding began to form, a recognition of the other's hidden depths and shared weariness of conflict. As the night deepened, so did their dialogue, growing more earnest and revealing. Kaito and Hana, standing under the moonlit canopy, found themselves sharing not as enemies, but as two souls caught in the currents of a turbulent age, yearning for a moment of genuine connection. And as they eventually parted ways, the night air seemed a little less heavy, the path ahead a little less daunting, each carrying away a piece of their unexpected encounter under the moonlight. As the moon waxed and waned above them, marking the passage of time, the secret meetings between Kaito and Hana became a haven from the storm of impending war. Each rendezvous was a stolen moment, a fragment of time carved out of their contrasting worlds. The risk of discovery loomed ever-present, but the bond that had formed between them proved to be a compelling force, drawing them back to the lake's tranquil shores. On one particularly clear night, as they sat beneath the sprawling canopy of an ancient tree, Hana turned to Kaito with a solemn look in her eyes. "Kaito, we tread on a dangerous path. Each meeting, each word exchanged, binds us closer. Yet it also tightens the noose around our necks. Why do we persist?" Kaito met her gaze, the reflected light of the stars dancing in his eyes. "Because, Hana, in a world that demanded our enmity, this, us, is an act of defiance. It is a declaration that we are more than mere pawns in a game of power. Our meetings, our conversations, they are a testament to our belief that there is another way." Hana's hand reached out, her fingers lightly brushing against his. "And yet, if we were discovered—" Kaito's hand covered hers, a silent reassurance. "Then we face it together. For now, let's not dwell on the ifs and buts. Tonight, let's just be two souls sharing in the beauty of this world." Their conversation shifted, lighter now, as they shared tales of their childhoods, their dreams, and even the mundane details of their daily lives. Laughter and thoughtful whispers blended into the tranquility of the night. As dawn approached, signaling the end of their stolen time, they stood, lingering in the moment. "Until next time," Hana whispered, her voice carrying a mixture of hope and apprehension. "Until next time," Kaito echoed, his hand reluctantly releasing hers. They parted ways, disappearing into the shadows of the forest, each step taking them back to their respective realities. As they retreated into their separate worlds, the promise of their next meeting lingered in their hearts, a beacon guiding them through the uncertainty of the days ahead. Chapter 4. As the autumn leaves began to wither, heralding the approach of winter, the world outside the lovers' secret haven grew ever more tumultuous. The drums of war beat a relentless rhythm, echoing the rapid pulse of anxious hearts throughout both the Minamoto and Takeda lands. The reality of their respective duties and the expectations of their clans weighed heavily upon Kaito and Hana, each day drawing them further into roles that felt increasingly like chains. Kaito spent his days amidst strategy meetings and rigorous training, his every moment consumed by the preparations for the inevitable conflict. Yet, with each swing of his sword and every mark he made on the war maps, his thoughts invariably drifted to Hana, to the gentle strength of her words and the warmth of her touch. The stark contrast between the love he harbored and the duties he must perform created a chasm within him, each side pulling with equal force. Meanwhile, Hana moved through the motions of her responsibilities. Her healing hands tended to the bruised and broken bodies of warriors. Her soothing words offered comfort to the fearful and the grieving. But her heart was elsewhere, caught in the delicate balance between her desire for peace and the looming spectre of war that threatened to engulf everything she held dear. Her moments with Kaito, so filled with hope and tender connection, felt like a distant dream in the harsh light of day. One evening, as they met under the cover of twilight, the strain of their double lives was evident in their weary eyes and the tension in their voices. "Kaito," Hana whispered, her voice laced with a tremble, "I fear the path we're on will lead us to a crossroads from which there's no return. Our families, our duties. How do we reconcile our love with the war that's coming?" Kaito pulled her close, his embrace a fortress against the encroaching despair. "I don't have the answers, Hana. All I know is that in a world bent on division and destruction, what we have is rare, and worth fighting for. Maybe, just maybe, our love can be the bridge to a better future. Their conversation turned to the practicalities of the coming conflict, the strategies and alliances that would shape the battlefield. They spoke in hushed tones, the gravity of the situation settling around them like a heavy cloak. And yet, amidst the talk of war and strategy, they found moments of solace in each other's presence, a quiet reassurance in the shared burden of their impossible love. As they parted that night, the reality of their situation settled in with renewed force. They were two souls caught in the maelstrom of history, their love a beacon in the darkness, yet also a potential spark for disaster. The path ahead was fraught with danger and heartache, but for now they held on to each other, to the fleeting moments of peace they'd carved out of a world on the brink of chaos. Their allegiance to their clans, to their families, and to the expectations of their birthright remained, but so too did the deep, unyielding bond they'd formed, a connection that defied the turmoil around them and offered a glimmer of hope in the gathering storm. Chapter 5. As autumn's fiery colours had faded into the cold embrace of winter, the winds had carried whispers through the corridors of both the Minamoto and Takeda strongholds. Rumours of an illicit bond between Kaito and Hana, once nothing more than murmurs on the breeze, began to solidify into accusations, casting long shadows over their clandestine meetings. One chilly evening, as Kaito made his way to the secret rendezvous, he sensed a subtle change in the air. The forest, once a haven of peace and solace, now felt charged with a silent warning. Unseen eyes seemed to watch his every move, and the rustling leaves whispered of betrayal. His warrior instincts on high alert, Kaito proceeded with caution, the weight of his sword a cold comfort at his side. Meanwhile, Hana, unaware of the watchful gaze upon them, waited by the lake, her thoughts a tumultuous mix of hope and apprehension. As Kaito emerged from the shadows, his expression grim, she sensed that something was amiss. "What troubles you?" she asked, her voice a soft concern. Kaito looked around, the moon casting a pale light on his troubled features. "We are no longer alone in our secret," he confessed. "Eyes and ears of our clans have grown suspicious of our absence, our loyalty questioned." Hana's heart sank, the reality of their situation crashing down upon her like a wave. "Then we must be more careful, or cease our meetings altogether," she whispered, the thought of losing this connection a sharp pain in her chest. But the decision was not theirs to make. Unbeknownst to them, a spy had been tracking their movements, gathering evidence of their forbidden affair. With each stolen moment Kaito and Hana shared, the noose tightened, the risk of discovery growing with each passing day. As they parted that night, the fear of what their love might cost them cast a pall over their farewell. They left with heavy hearts, each step back to their respective lives a silent battle between the duty they were born into and the love that had grown between them. As the chill of winter had deepened, drawing a frost over the once blooming landscape, Kaito and Hana found themselves increasingly ensnared in the web of politics and looming war. The whispers and rumours of their meetings had not yet burst into the open, but the tension and suspicion within their respective clans were palpable. In a desperate bid to control the narrative and to steer their families away from an all-out war, they began to use their influence subtly, advocating for diplomacy and negotiation over the clash of swords. Kaito, respected for his strategic mind and warrior skills, started to counsel restraint in the war councils, emphasizing the costs of war and the benefits of seeking a peaceful resolution. "Consider the lives saved if we pursue a path of dialogue with the Takeda," he urged in a council meeting, his voice a blend of earnestness and calculated persuasion. "Strength is not just in conquest, but in forging lasting peace. Meanwhile, Hana employed her own methods, using her position and beloved status to sway the hearts of her clan. She spoke to the healers, the elders, and those who held sway in the Takeda household, painting a picture of the future that did not involve endless cycles of retribution and sorrow. "What good is our pride if it leaves us with a legacy of graves?" she asked softly, her words echoing in the quiet halls and minds of her listeners. Their efforts were not in vain. Whispers of a possible truce began to circulate, replacing some of the murmurs of suspicion and betrayal. Both the Minamoto and Takeda clans, though still wary, started to entertain the notion that there might be another way to resolve their long-standing feud. Envoys were sent, tentative at first, carrying messages of negotiation and the potential terms of peace. Kaito and Hana continued to meet, though less frequently, and with even greater caution. Each encounter was laced with a mix of hope and desperation, as they shared updates and planned their next steps. "We are walking a razor's edge," Kaito confessed during one such meeting, the moonlight casting long shadows around them. "But perhaps, just perhaps, we can turn this tide." Hana nodded, her determination a steady flame in the encroaching cold. "We must believe in the world we are trying to create, even when others cannot see it," she replied, her hand finding his in the darkness. As they parted ways, the future remained uncertain, the balance between war and peace as delicate as the frost on the winter blooms. But for now, they had managed to sow the seeds of diplomacy, their clandestine love fueling a quiet but powerful push for a different path. The art of diplomacy, they had learned, was much like the art of love, a complex dance of give and take, of knowing when to hold on and when to let go. And as the first light of dawn broke over the horizon, there was a fragile sense of hope that perhaps their efforts might yet bear fruit. As the fragile buds of diplomacy began to take root, a tense truce descended over the lands of the Minamoto and Takeda clans. The usual preparations for war were muted, replaced by the cautious optimism of potential peace. Kaito and Hana, the architects of this delicate ceasefire, continued to tread carefully, fully aware that the slightest misstep could shatter the fragile peace they'd worked so hard to cultivate. In a secret meeting, deep within the forest, they discussed the next steps, their voices low under the cover of rustling leaves. "We have managed to delay the conflict, but how long before doubts and old grudges resurface?" Kaito questioned, his face etched with concern. "Our clans are like old trees, stubborn and set in their ways." Hana, her hands clasped before her, responded with a calm resolve. "Then we must be the gentle stream that gradually shapes the stone. We've opened a door, Kaito. Now, we must ensure it stays open." They planned their moves like players in a game of shogi, anticipating reactions and countering doubts. Kaito spoke of arranging secret negotiations, of influential allies who might be swayed to their cause. Hana proposed cultural exchanges, gatherings where members of both clans might meet, not as enemies, but as equals. The days passed, and the truce held, but it was as tenuous as the morning frost. Messages and envoys travelled between the clans, each carrying the heavy burden of centuries-old animosity and the fragile hope of reconciliation. Kaito and Hana watched from the shadows, guiding the process with careful hands. Then, one day, as they met to discuss the latest developments, Hana brought troubling news. "There are those in the Takeda clan who view this truce as weakness," she confided, her brow furrowed with worry. "They push for a return to arms to honor through blood." Kaito's expression darkened. "The same sentiments echo within the Minamoto. We are a breath away from tipping back into war." He paused, taking a deep breath. "Perhaps it is time we consider a more drastic approach." Hana met his gaze, her own determination clear. "Whatever it takes, Kaito. We've come too far to let it all unravel now." Chapter 6. The precarious balance of the truce had begun to unravel as the first snows of winter blanketed the land. The whispered rumors and discreet inquiries that had been circling around Kaito and Hana finally coalesced into a pointed accusation. The spy, waiting patiently to present his evidence of their forbidden meetings and exchanges, had finally discussed his findings to the leaders of the Minamoto clan. The news had spread like wildfire, reaching the Takeda soon after, igniting outrage and a sense of betrayal within both houses. In a hastily called council meeting within the Minamoto stronghold, Kaito had stood rigidly before his elders, the gravity of the situation pressing down upon him. The room had been thick with tension, the air sharp with whispered accusations and cold stares. "Explain yourself, Kaito," demanded the clan head, his voice thunderous and his eyes piercing. "Had you forsaken your clan for a Takeda? Had you dishonored your ancestors with this treachery?" Kaito's gaze remained steady, though his heart pounded a frantic rhythm. "I did not forsake our people. My actions, though they may have seemed misguided, were taken with the intention of forging a lasting peace." "Peace?" a council member scoffed, rising from his seat. "Or an illicit romance that jeopardizes our position and mocks our sacrifices." The room erupted into chaos, voices clashing like swords. Kaito stood firm, his mind racing for a way to quell the storm, to explain the depth and purity of his intentions without further incriminating himself or Hana. Meanwhile, within the Takeda keep, Hana faced her own trial. Her father, a man of stern principles and fierce pride, had confronted her, the disappointment and anger clear in his furrowed brow. "Hana, tell me it's not true," he had pleaded, a rare note of vulnerability in his voice. "Tell me you haven't given our enemies a foothold into our family, into our hearts." Hana's resolve faltered, the weight of her father's gaze almost too much to bear. "Father, I did what I thought was right. I believed that Kaito and I could guide our clans away from the path of endless war." Her words hung in the air, met with a heavy silence. The disappointment and sense of betrayal were palpable, and Hana felt a deep chasm opening between her and her family, her clan, her very identity. As the news of their relationship and its implications spread, Kaito and Hana found themselves increasingly isolated, their noble intentions lost in a sea of anger and mistrust. The threads of their carefully woven plans had unraveled swiftly, leaving them exposed and vulnerable. The world they had hoped to change seemed to turn against them, and the future they had envisioned together grew dimmer with each passing moment. The fragile truce that had been so carefully constructed began to crumble, as did the trust and standing Kaito and Hana once held within their families. The accusations of betrayal and dishonor stained not only their names, but also the very cause for which they had been secretly striving. Kaito, now under strict surveillance, was confined within the walls of the Minamoto estate, a prisoner of his own lineage. The freedom he once took for granted, both within his clan and within the forest where he met Hana, was stripped away, leaving him to grapple with the consequences of their discovered love. The warrior, known for his calm demeanor and strategic mind, found himself pacing like a caged tiger, the walls of his room a constant reminder of the price of his heart's rebellion. Hana, similarly, was kept under a watchful eye within the Takeda keep. Her movements were restricted, her pleas for understanding and peace met with cold indifference or outright hostility. The healing hands that once brought comfort to so many were now bound by the invisible chains of shame and familial duty. She sat alone, her thoughts a tumultuous sea of regret and defiance, wondering if the dream of peace they had nurtured was nothing more than a fleeting illusion. In the depths of their separate confinements, Kaito and Hana were left to reflect on the path that led them here, each moment of joy and connection now tinged with the pain of their current reality. The memory of their meetings, once a source of solace, now served as a cruel reminder of what they had lost and what they stood to lose. As the days passed, the tension between the Minamoto and Takeda clans escalated, with both sides preparing for the inevitable resumption of hostilities. The brief hope of peace dissolved like mist at dawn, replaced by the all-too familiar drumbeat of war. In the midst of this brewing storm, Kaito and Hana were forced to confront the devastating impact of their relationship, not only on their own lives, but also on the fate of their people. Chapter 7. The air had been thick with the tension of impending war, and the clamour of preparations had echoed ominously through the lands. Kaito and Hana, once architects of a fragile peace, had found themselves reluctantly drawn into the very heart of the conflict they had sought to avoid. Kaito, shrouded in disgrace and closely watched by his clan, had been unexpectedly summoned to the War Council. The clan elders, their eyes cold and calculating, had laid before him a stark decree. "You will redeem your honor on the battlefield, Kaito," they had declared. "Your blade will serve the Minamoto once more, and you will fight to erase the stain you have brought upon us." The choice had not been a choice at all. It had been an ultimatum, a command that he, bound by duty and honor, could not refuse. Despite the turmoil within him, he had steeled himself, accepting the grim role forced upon him. Meanwhile, Hana, her own reputation tarnished, had faced a similar fate within the walls of the Takeda keep. Her father, torn between paternal love and the rigid demands of honor, had delivered the harsh edict. "Hana, you will accompany the healers to the battlefield. You will tend to the wounded and dying. This is where you will serve your clan in these dark times." Her protests, her pleas for a different path, had been met with an unyielding resolve. The path of the healer, once a path of life, was now irrevocably intertwined with the path of war. In the quiet moments before the march to war, they each had found a moment of solitude, reflecting on the journey that had led them here. The memories of their secret meetings, the dreams they had shared, and the love that had blossomed between them had seemed like fragments of another life. As they had set out towards the battlefield, the stark reality had set in. They were pawns in a much larger game, a game that demanded their allegiance and their lives. With heavy hearts and a lingering look at the skies they once shared, they had moved forward, each step taking them closer to the uncertain dawn of battle. The dawn of the fateful day had broken with a sky painted in ominous hues, as if the heavens themselves mourned the inevitable bloodshed. The battlefield, a vast expanse between the lands of the Minamoto and Takeda clans, had become a sea of men and steel, the air thick with the tension of impending doom. Kaito had stood among the ranks of the Minamoto warriors, his once shining armor now dulled. Across the field, Hana had moved among the healers, her hands steady but her spirit trembling with every beat of the war drums. The clamour of soldiers and the neighing of horses had filled the air. She had looked across the expanse, her thoughts reaching out to Kaito, wondering if he too had felt the weight of the moment, the crushing inevitability of their situation. As the commands were given and the two armies had charged, the ground had shaken with the fury of the onslaught. Kaito, his sword in hand, had moved with a warrior's grace, his every strike and parry a dance of death. Yet his eyes had constantly searched the melee, a part of him dreading the moment when he might come face to face with the Takeda, with Hana. The battle had raged, a tumultuous storm of shouts and clashing steel. Hana, her hands red with the blood of the fallen, had worked tirelessly to save as many lives as she could. The cries of the wounded and dying had filled her ears, a grim reminder of the cost of their failed dreams. And through it all, Her heart had ached with the knowledge that Kaito was out there, in the midst of the carnage, perhaps laying down his life at that very moment. As fate would have it, in a brief lull in the fighting, their eyes had met across the battlefield, a fleeting moment of connection amidst the chaos. Their gazes had locked, 1,000 words passing between them in a silent exchange. It was a look of love, of regret, of farewell. Then, as quickly as it had happened, they were pulled back into the maelstrom, forced to focus on the grim task at hand. The day had worn on, the sun moving across the sky as if indifferent to the tragedy unfolding below. The once green field had turned to mud, stained with the blood of friend and foe alike. Kaito had fought with a desperation born of a man with nothing left to lose, while Hana had healed with the fervour of someone clinging to the last vestiges of hope. As twilight had claimed the battlefield, a haunting stillness had descended. The ground, scarred and sodden, had told the brutal tale of the day's conflict. Bodies of the fallen had lain strewn across the field, their silent forms a grim testament to the ferocity of the battle. The air, once filled with the clash of steel and cries of combatants, now carried only the low, mournful moans of the injured and the quiet weeping of those who searched for loved ones amongst the carnage. In the fading light, the survivors had moved like spectres, their faces etched with exhaustion and grief. They had tread carefully, navigating between friend and foe alike, their movements methodical and numb as they began the grim task of tending to the wounded and retrieving the dead. The sharp scent of blood and smoke had tainted the air. Both the Minamoto and Takeda camps, set back from the direct violence, had now become scenes of controlled chaos. Healers had worked tirelessly, their hands moving in a blur as they stitched wounds and set broken bones. Commanders had huddled in grim consultation, their expressions heavy with the burden of leadership and loss. Yet, amidst the flurry of activity, 2 figures were notably absent, their fates whispered about with hushed concern and morbid curiosity. Kaito, the once proud Minamoto warrior, and Hana, the compassionate Takeda healer, were nowhere to be found. Some had said they fell in the battle, their bodies yet to be identified among the many. Others had speculated that they fled, overcome by the futility of the conflict and their role in its inception. Whispers had circulated of a last stand, a final act of defiance or redemption, but the truth was as obscured as the blood-stained field they once walked upon. As night fully enveloped the land, the efforts had continued under torchlight, the flickering flames casting shadows across the weary faces of those who laboured on. The tasks of the living were far from over. There were wounds to heal, souls to comfort, and the dead to honour. The first light of dawn had revealed little, but extended the battlefield's desolate reach. The once contested land was now a vast grave. The fate of Kaito and Hana remained a whispered mystery, their stories lost in the broader tale of loss and survival. The echoes of their love and the conflict it engendered had rippled outwards, leaving an indelible mark on the hearts and memories of all who remained. Chapter 8. In the aftermath of the battle, as the seasons had turned and the land began to heal, the story of Kaito and Hana transformed from whispered scandal to quiet legend. The fields once marred by the scars of war now yielded new growth, a testament to nature's resilience. The Minamoto and Takeda clans, their numbers diminished, their pride humbled, gradually turned to rebuilding. But no tale was as poignant as the one spoken by the old and wise, those who had seen the patterns of history weave and repeat. They talked of Kaito and Hana not just as individuals, but as symbols of a greater struggle, a reminder that even in the darkest times there were those who dared to dream of peace and unity. Their story, though tinged with tragedy, carried with it a message of hope and resilience, a call to future generations to seek harmony over discord. The clans, for their part, bore the legacy of the conflict and the lovers' role in it with a complex mix of regret and reflection. Leaders who once clamoured for war now spoke more cautiously, their martial fervour cooled by the memory of what was lost. Young warriors, raised on tales of Kaito's bravery and Hana's compassion, began to question the path of endless vengeance, looking instead to diplomacy and alliance as means to secure their people's future. As years passed, the exact fate of Kaito and Hana faded into obscurity, their earthly end less important than the ideals they embodied. The legend of Kaito and Hana endured, a whispered legend that wound its way through the ages, inspiring songs, stories, and perhaps changes of heart. It was a reminder that even in a world often ruled by the sword, there existed the enduring power of love, the possibility of peace, and the importance of dreaming of a better tomorrow. And so, as the stars wheeled overhead in their eternal dance, the story of Kaito and Hana became a part of the land, a soulful echo of a love that dared to defy the tides of war. In the villages and towns, around firesides and in the marketplaces, the tale of the star-crossed lovers was told and retold, each iteration adding its own layer of myth and meaning. Some said Kaito and Hana perished in the battle, their bodies embraced in death as they could not be in life. Others whispered of a last-minute escape, the pair fleeing into the unknown, their love the guiding star in their pursuit of a new beginning. All spoke of the importance to find peace and love amongst the threat of war,